Hello, class, and welcome to Chapter 8, all about harassment. This is what I do on a daily basis. So, my job as the Director of Institutional Equity and Diversity at St. Louis University. My office oversees harassment and discrimination for the university. So, if any student, staff, or faculty member feels like they are treated differently because of a protected characteristic, then my office is the office they come to seek remedy and redress. So this is something obviously that I truly love doing. It's what I get paid to do, but it's also I feel like it's also part of my duty in service to my university to make sure that my university is free from harassment and discrimination to the highest extent possible. And I know a governor state and in any other university, and for that matter, any other organization or company that you work for, obviously this should be one of the top goals from an employment standpoint, is to eliminate harassment and discrimination in all of its forms from being pervasive in the workplace. But for purposes of chapter 8, what I want you to know, a couple things. First, if you go to page 282, at the very top, there list 4 elements of a claim for harassment. You can't just walk into your boss and say, hey, I've been harassed, and that's it. There is a certain threshold that needs to be met. And again, those 4 elements of a harassment claim are very, very important for you to know. And you might want to know that for the test. So just this is a little help you there. But a couple things that I want to make note on those 4 elements is you notice one of them is based on an employment. Well, first off, it has to be based on a protected characteristic. So it has to be harassment based on sex or age or religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, things along those lines that we've discussed in previous chapters that are legally protected under Title VII and then under most states' discrimination laws. So you can't say, well, I'm being discriminated against because I have glasses, so for those of you who are kind of from the Chicago area who might be Cubs or White Sox fans, I'm from St. Louis and I live in St. Louis, so obviously I'm a St. Louis Cardinals fan. So I'm sorry to you Cubs and White Sox fans, but like you can't come into your boss and say I'm being treated differently because I'm a St. Louis Cardinal fan or because I'm a Cubs fan. Those aren't legally protected under the law, so you can't you bring a harassment claim. So that's be one of the protected characteristics. But also it's based on an employment action. So if somebody there has to be some type of action associated or employment action. So you were terminated, you were demoted, you were given a write-up. There's some action has to have taken place, and that can include things like creating an environment where I feel safe or unsafe or scared. So there has to be some action based on this. So make sure you understand kind of what that element is as well. So obviously, it has to be unwelcome. If you feel like somebody is sexually harassing you, but you know what, you like them and you're flirting back with them and you maybe want to go out on a date with them, that's probably welcome. So the action has to be something that you do not want, that you want it to be eliminated. So you can't just say, well, you can't have it both ways. You can't claim harassment and also be welcoming at the same time. If it's unwelcome, then that qualifies. So it kind of sounds like that would be. It kind of makes sense, but again, you'd be surprised how often that is an element that goes into it. So, and a lot of these harassments, are like, for example, sexual harassment. I think a lot of us are familiar with the term, maybe quid pro quo, which is a Latin phrase which means this for that. So your boss says, if you don't go out on a date with me, I will fire you. Or if you go out on a date with me, I will give you $1,000 raise. This for that, quid pro quo. So that's kind of the most known version of like sexual harassment. But there's another form of harassment that falls under this idea of hostile work environment, which basically this person has been exposed to an environment that has become hostile, even if not directly related to them. And I'll give you a prime example. Let's say that you work in a small office of 5 people and you're the only woman in that office. Well, let's say the 4 men whose cubicles are all around you all have in their cubicle pictures of women in bikinis and some sexist jokes and a lot of girls in bikini advertising, and maybe even they have gentlemen's magazines, if you will. So it's this environment where all this sexualized stuff is around, and you as the only woman are very bothered by this, which is very understandable. Even though they may not be targeting you personally, but the environment that has been created has created an environment of hostility. So that would qualify under harassment, under this idea of a hostile work environment. And again, this is not just sex that this applies to. This applies to age. It applies to religion, racial aspects, national origin, any of the protected characteristics this can fall under. So, and then under this idea of hostile work environment, it has to create what we call severe and pervasive. So, if one person, let's say has a bikini calendar, in their cubicle, and that's probably not too severe or pervasive because it's just one aspect. And especially if you ask that person, hey, do you mind taking that down? And they take it down, you haven't really proved a case for a hostile work environment because it was a one small isolated thing and that person took it down upon request. So for this idea of hostile work environment to be able to bring a case against, it has to be what we call severe and pervasive. So it has to be pretty extensive, and it has to happen multiple times, so to speak. But again, your book does a good job of talking about what it means to be severe and pervasive. So make sure you understand about that. As far as, how far do we look at a company's liability? So how far can they be, because, a company may not be doing anything wrong, but it could be one or two managers that have kind of gone rogue and done this stuff, and the company maybe ends up firing them as a result of their actions. So at what point is a company itself or an organization liable for these things? Well, page 297 talks about what we call affirmative defenses that a company can utilize to show that they as a company were not responsible, but some rogue manager, vice president, whatever, has gone on their own. And again, there are two elements behind this. Is one, did the employer exercise reasonable care to prevent and correct any harassment? Did they have a harassment policy? Did they have a complaint procedure where these things to be reported? And and do they do annual training on sexual harassment or racial discrimination? Do they do training? So they've tried to educate you so what happens and what you can do. So, and the second is the person bringing the suit failed to take advantage of any preventative or corrective opportunities. So, if the company had a complaint procedure, if they chose to ignore it, then usually the company would not be responsible. If the company has set up ways to address this and you as the plaintiff ignore all those and just trying to go out on your own, generally you won't be successful in a claim against your company because the company is trying to help you if you experience these things. So those are the things that we talk about as far as affirmative defenses that a company can utilize. Page 310 of your textbook does a wonderful job of talking about how you can eliminate harassment, details of a harassment policy, the complaint procedure. I think there's maybe 7 or 8 or 9 different bullet points about what you can do in that area. Make sure you understand all those elements on page 310 about eliminating, or how you handle harassment from an organizational standpoint. And the last point I want you to know for this chapter is kind of the last point of the chapter about remedies, about what can you reasonably expect to get out of an employer, with harassment. And generally, if it's just 1 or 2 people who are harassing you, generally the highest remedy is to terminate them from employment. And obviously that is something that a lot of companies do for individuals found responsible. So now, again, for purposes of this class, I won't go into too much detail about suing your employer and getting damages. That's a little bit outside the scope of what I want to talk about, but remedies can play a major factor. Let's say a female employee is subjected to constant sexual harassment, not just flirting, but I mean inappropriate touching, inappropriate exposure, to a sexualized work environment. Well, if there's a big investigation and the remedy is, they just tell those managers, hey, don't do it again, that's probably not an acceptable remedy, and that woman would have a very strong case of cause of action against her employer because the remedy didn't fit the crime, so to speak. So, if somebody did all these things and they weren't fired or at least severely reprimanded, that could be an issue for the organization. So the remedies need to match fairly closely with how serious the issue was. So kind of pay attention to that aspect. So. All right. Well, that's the last part for chapter 8, and we're moving right along. So thank you for your attention, and as always, let me know if you have any questions.